Hey, Infidelity Love Lies fam. Let's talk about the absolute breaking point. Not some slow, creeping realization, but the instant your carefully constructed life shatters. For me, it wasn't the whispered rumors or the late night texts or even the lipstick on his shirt. It was the sharp, sickening crack of his hand across my face in our opulent living room, the kind of sound that screams louder than any shout. That single ugly sound didn't just break the fragile piece of our perfect curated life. It detonated the illusion I had so carefully constructed for a decade. My head snapped back, the sting searing, but the real impact wasn't on my skin. It was deeper, a shattering blow to the very core of my being, the absolute final insult in a decade-long saga of quiet sacrifices and unspoken promises. In that instant, amidst the ringing silence, I saw with blinding clarity the crumbling edifice of my marriage, the slow, insidious erosion of my identity, and the heart-wrenching distance growing between me and the child I had nurtured. There was no more denying the truth, no more hiding behind hope. My world, once a vibrant canvas of shared dreams, had become a desolate landscape, and I was standing in the ruins, utterly alone. But something new ignited in that desolation, a flicker of defiance, a quiet whisper that this pain, this ultimate betrayal, would not be my end. It would be my beginning. The tension in the house had been a palpable entity, a silent scream building between Daniel and me, ready to erupt into a storm that would change everything forever. It had escalated over dinner, the air crackling with unspoken animosity. Daniel, my husband of 10 years, this polished, charming man, was advocating for another late night for our son. A trip to an amusement park with Sophie and him dismissing my concerns about his complex food allergies, his bedtime, his need for routine, brushing them off as overprotective nonsense. My carefully constructed calmness, the armor I'd worn for months, snapped shattering like cheap glass. All the years of silent sacrifice, the endless emotional labor, the gut-wrenching pain of his escalating betrayal, the agonizing loss of my son's affection, it all coalesced into a furious guttural cry that tore from my throat. You are destroying him, Daniel. You are letting her poison his mind. You are letting her risk his health for a moment of indulgence, and you are destroying us. You have already destroyed us. My voice was raw, unfamiliar, laced with years of suppressed rage and an unbearable, suffocating hurt. Daniel's face contorted a mask of cold fury, his eyes blazing with contempt. You are hysterical, Olivia. You are the problem. You are suffocating everyone with your rules and your paranoia. You're a nag, Liv, a constant drain. The argument escalated. Words hurled like sharpened knives, each one drawing blood, each one designed to inflict maximum pain. The living room, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, felt like a brutal battleground, toxic and suffocating. And then he did it. Mid-sentence, as I stood there, tears streaming down my face, begging him to see, to understand, to simply acknowledge the wreckage he had created, he raised his hand. And he slapped me. I stood there, utterly still, numb, watching him, his chest heaving, his face red with rage, and I knew. Enough. The word resonated in my mind not as a whisper, but as a booming, undeniable declaration. Enough. This is over. This ends now. In that precise, brutal moment, everything snapped into razor-sharp focus. The years of sacrificing my dreams, my identity, my career, my very essence for his. The crushing emotional toll of being his silent support, his invisible anchor. The agony of watching him betray me, openly, defiantly. The heartbreaking, soul-crushing distance from my son orchestrated by his mistress. And now this final ultimate insult. It wasn't just a slap. It was the final decisive nail in the coffin of a marriage that had already died 1,000 quiet deaths, 1,000 agonizing cuts. The deepest cut, the most unbearable pain, the one that truly threatened to break me, had come earlier from my own flesh and blood. Just days before the slap, my son, my sweet, innocent boy, had looked at me, his eyes devoid of warmth, and uttered words that shattered my soul. Mom, I'd be happier if Sophie were my mom. Those words. They echoed in the silence of our opulent home, a venomous whisper from the mouth of my own child. It wasn't just the betrayal of a husband, it was the slow, insidious erosion of my bond with my son. He was only 10, navigating the turbulent waters of pre-adolescence, pushing boundaries, testing limits. And Sophie, Daniel's personal assistant turned mistress, with her carefully crafted charm, exploited every single one of them, systematically driving a wedge between us. I was the strict mother, the one who insisted on healthy, balanced meals, who limited screen time, who understood his complex food allergies, and meticulously prevented him from eating things that would make him sick, sending him to the ER. I was the one who said no to soda and processed snacks because I knew the consequences for his sensitive system. I was the one who prioritized his well-being, even when it meant being the bad guy. Sophie, on the other hand, was the fun one. She'd sneak him pizza and sugary sodas when Daniel was out, knowingly bypassing my strict rules. She'd take him to arcades late into the night, letting him stay up past his bedtime, filling his head with fantasies of freedom, a life without rules. She'd buy him the newest video games, allow him unlimited iPad time, and shower him with lavish, expensive gifts. To my son, she was the embodiment of indulgence, the carefree spirit who never said no, the instant gratification machine. I was the old-fashioned one, the boring one, the mean one. He started rolling his eyes at my rules, turning away when I tried to explain his face, a mask of adolescent disdain, a mirror of Daniel's contempt. He started going to Sophie for comfort, for advice, for everything, seeking solace in her calculated kindness. I saw it happening. Felt the icy grip of despair as my son, my little boy, my precious bond, drifted further and further away, manipulated by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a pawn in her game, to replace me entirely. Now, for those of you wondering how I got here, how a woman like me found herself in this nightmare, let me rewind. I was Olivia, 33 years old at the time of the slap, an accountant at a small financial firm in suburban Oregon. I was intelligent, educated, and pretty successful in my career before I put it on hold. But I was also deeply emotional, a woman who truly believed in the sanctity of family and friendship above all else. My bond with Daniel had been the foundation of my adult life. We were college sweethearts, two young, ambitious people who had built a life that glittered on the surface, the big house, the luxury cars, the envy of our social circle. I'd willingly, lovingly traded my own career in art restoration, a passion I adored, for the quiet satisfaction of being his anchor, his bedrock, his domestic goddess. And I never once regretted it. Not truly. Not until the whispers began, the tiny, insidious doubts that started to chip away at my perfect reality. It started subtly, as most betrayals do. A whisper of unfamiliar perfume clinging to a freshly laundered shirt. Not a strong scent, just a ghost, barely there, but enough to snag my attention, to prickle the hairs on my arms. A fleeting glance from Daniel, sharp and impatient, when my questions about his day lingered a moment too long, a flash of irritation I hadn't seen before. Then came the lipstick. A vibrant, audacious cherry red smudged ever so faintly on the collar of a crisp white dress shirt he'd tossed into the hamper. It wasn't mine. My signature shade was a muted rose, a quiet confidence, subtle and sophisticated. This was a scream. My stomach clenched, a cold, hard knot forming in my gut, a premonition of disaster. I told myself it was nothing. A client. A clumsy accident at a business dinner. But the image lodged itself in my mind, a tiny, irritating shard of glass under my skin, impossible to ignore. Then came the late nights. Just a big project, Liv. You know how it is, the new merger is intense. His voice, once warm and reassuring, had developed a clipped edge, a forced cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge, an artificiality that screamed louder than any confession. He started coming home smelling not just of stale coffee from long hours at the office, but of something else. Something sweet and floral, not cloying like the lipstick, but fresh, youthful, distinctly feminine. It was the scent of possibility, of newness, of a vibrant life happening elsewhere, and it clung to him like a second skin, suffocating me in its subtle intimacy. The silences between us grew longer, heavier, punctuated only by his distracted hums, or my own forced, desperate attempts at conversation, trying to bridge a chasm that was growing wider by the day. I'd watch him across the dinner table, his eyes distant, unfocused, his mind clearly somewhere, or with someone else. The cracks in our perfect facade were widening slowly, imperceptibly at first, but undeniably there. And I was the only one who seemed to notice, the only one haunted by the truth flickering at the edges of my vision. That's when I found the lipstick. It wasn't just a smudge on a collar anymore. It was a tangible, undeniable piece of evidence tucked away in the shadows of his expensive car, a smoking gun, in the silence. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the cool metal, a stark contrast to the burning, searing heat in my chest, a fire of rage and despair. It was the exact same shade, that defiant cherry red, unapologetic and bold. My breath caught in my throat, a dry gasp of agony. This wasn't a client. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. This was hers. I sat there for a long time, the engine off the quiet hum of the city, outside, a stark contrast to the roaring, deafening chaos in my head. A decade of unwavering devotion, of unquestioning trust, of building a life, a family, an entire world around this man. Was it all just a meticulously crafted lie? I started seeing her everywhere. Not literally, not yet, but in every subtle shift in Daniel's demeanor, in every guarded glance, in every dismissive tone. His phone became an extension of his hand, guarded face down on the table. Always. Our intimate evenings, once filled with easy laughter and shared dreams, dissolved into him scrolling through emails claiming urgent work, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screen, a wall between us. The whispers from his colleagues started to trickle back to me, hushed tones, sympathetic glances, a subtle shift in their demeanor when they saw me. That new assistant, Sophie, she's very close with Daniel. Sophie. The name landed like a stone in my gut, heavy and sickening. A young, brilliant intern from our old university, barely out of college, now Daniel's personal assistant. My mind reeled. I remembered her, a bright-eyed girl full of ambition, almost innocent. How incredibly naive I had been, welcoming her, even offering advice, seeing her as a protege, not a predator. The thought twisted in my stomach, a bitter bile rising in my throat. The air in our beautiful, expensive apartment, once so full of shared dreams and laughter, now felt heavy with unspoken truths, thick with the stench of betrayal. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating in plain sight, and the man who was supposed to be my lifeguard was the one holding my head under the water. The fear was no longer about losing him. It was about losing myself, losing my grip on reality. Desperate, I made a call, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hand, to a private investigator. The truth, however ugly, was now my only way out, my only path to sanity. The reports came back, thick envelopes filled with cold, hard facts that sliced through my last vestiges of denial like a surgeon's scalpel. Photographs, timestamps, locations. Daniel and Sophie, late-night dinners, secluded coffee shops, hushed conversations in his car, and then the hotels, multiple hotels, different cities. The dates, the times, the sheer audacity of it all burned into my retina, searing themselves into my memory. It wasn't just a fleeting affair. It was a brazen, ongoing saga, meticulously planned, unfolding right under my nose, while I meticulously planned his meals, ironed his shirts, and managed our son's schedule. The humiliation was a physical ache, a searing pain that radiated from my chest, poisoning my bloodstream. It felt like my very foundation was cracking, piece by agonizing piece crumbling into dust. But the real gut punch came directly from Sophie herself. Before I could even process the investigator's findings, before I could even formulate a plan, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I opened it, and there it was. A picture. Daniel and Sophie tangled together in a hotel bed. a cruel, mocking smile playing on her lips, a look of smug triumph in her eyes, as if daring me to react. It was a direct hit, a calculated declaration of war. She wasn't just taking my husband, she was reveling in my pain, relishing in her victory. That night, even as the sting lingered on my cheek, a physical reminder of his cruelty, my mind was sharper, clearer than it had been in years. I calmly packed a small bag, making sure to include a few sentimental items, a few cherished memories that were untainted by him. I pulled out my old laptop, the one I hadn't touched in ages, a relic of my past life, and sent an email. To a lawyer. A simple, concise message, chillingly formal. I need to file for divorce immediately. This is a domestic violence matter. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, painful clinical conversations with strangers, and the agonizing process of separating our lives, of dismantling a decade of history. I fought for my son fiercely, not just for visitation rights, but for what was fair, for what was safe. But I also knew I needed to step back to give him space, to understand, to grieve, to process, without the constant suffocating tension of our crumbling marriage, without being caught in the crossfire. It broke my heart into a million pieces, but I made the difficult decision to temporarily cede primary custody, ensuring I would have consistent protected time with him, time away from the toxicity. I knew this was a battle for his future, and sometimes a strategic retreat is the bravest advance. I was taking control, not fighting to stay in a broken marriage, but fighting to leave, to reclaim my life, to reclaim us. And as soon as the papers were signed, as soon as the ink was dry on the official dissolution of my gilded cage, I booked a one-way ticket to Italy. The place I'd always dreamed of, a place where I could breathe again, a place where I could find myself entirely apart from him, entirely new. Daniel eventually married Sophie. Their carefully curated wedding photos, plastered across social media for the world to see, were a stark, unsettling reminder of the life I had left behind, a grotesque pantomime of the happiness they had stolen. But the universe, in its own mysterious, often brutal way, has a peculiar sense of poetic justice, a way of balancing the scales. Life with Sophie, as it turned out, wasn't the carefree paradise my son had envisioned. Daniel, who had never truly learned to care for anyone but himself, proved utterly incapable of handling our son's complex food allergies. There were scarce, terrifying emergency room visits that I only heard about secondhand, desperate, panicked calls from his school, and the harsh realization that fun didn't always equate to safety, and that indulgence often came at a terrible cost. Sophie, for all her calculated charm and youthful vigor, wilted under the mundane, relentless pressures of daily life, unable to manage a household or handle Daniel's increasingly demanding and volatile schedule, his growing frustrations. He developed chronic stomach issues, a constant companion to his stress and spiraling career. And Sophie, the special assistant, found herself overwhelmed, drowning, unable to cope with the harsh reality of a marriage that lacked the quiet strength, the unwavering support, the invisible labor I had once provided effortlessly. Slowly, subtly, my son started to see. He'd call me small voice hesitant, asking about his favorite healthy snacks, about my old routines, about the calming presence I used to be. He'd tell me about Sophie's impatience, her short temper, Daniel's growing frustration and unpredictable outbursts. He began to understand the quiet sacrifices, the invisible labor, the unconditional love that had once defined our home, that had truly held our family together. He saw the difference stark and undeniable between genuine care and superficial indulgence. But by then, I was no longer waiting. I was living. In a sun-drenched studio in Italy, the scent of olive groves and fresh paint filling my days, the warm Mediterranean breeze on my skin. I reconnected with old friends, found kindred spirits, traveled to charming ancient villages, and poured my entire soul onto canvases, each vibrant brushstroke, a testament to my newfound freedom, my resilience. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was Olivia, the woman who had dared to walk away, who had chosen herself, who had rebuilt her life from the ashes of betrayal. They chose to lose me. I chose to find myself. And the truth is, sometimes that painful moment, that ultimate breaking point, that final insult, isn't an ending. It's the most powerful beginning you could ever imagine. A slap can sting, yes, but sometimes it's the very force needed to shake you awake to remind you that your worth is non-negotiable, that your spirit is unbreakable, and that your life is fiercely, unequivocally yours to reclaim. Hey everyone, it's Olivia from Infidelity Love Lies. This journey, it's been a lot, and I know so many of you out there have faced your own turning points, those moments where you knew deep down you had to choose yourself to walk away from what was destroying you. What was your enough is enough moment? What was the moment that made you realize you had to leave to find your own strength, your own truth? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can all reflect, heal, and empower each other.